Today, we're talking about mental health matters. And to help to understand this, we have a special guest today, Donna Alexander. She's a social worker and a specialist in addiction and mental health. Now, I'll give you a quick background on Donna. She's currently serves as the Equity and Inclusion Counsel at the Department of Psychiatry and is also an adjunct lecturer at the Factor Interwash Faculty of Social Work at the University of Toronto. She currently serves as the Vice Chair of Black Mental Health Canada and serves as an advisor of the Pathways to Care Protect for Black Youth. She previously served as the Vice President of Black Health Alliance and was a member of the Black Experience in the Healthcare Initiative at, at Sinai Health Systems. She facilitates trainings for staff at community-based agencies on factors relating to concurrent disorders and cultural safety in clinical practices. Donna holds a master's in social work from the University of Toronto and currently works at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. Welcome, Donna. Good morning. It's glad to see. How are you doing?
Good.
It's great to see you this.
All things considered, I would say I'm bright-eyed and bushy-tailed.
All right, I love to hear it.
It's not usual in the morning.
Well, yeah, I'm not so much a morning person myself, so I can fully relate. So let's go into it. Let's talk about there's a backdrop. 2020 has really been a chaotic year, to say the least. We've experienced a cultural awakening as global populations, regardless of color, really took to the streets to protest, against the killing of George Floyd and police brutality as a whole. That coupled with, Karen reportings and the killing of many others have really elevated the public awareness of discrimination and brutality facing the Black community, which in turn has resulted in the elevation of Black Lives Matter movement. Additionally, the Black community was ravaged by COVID-19 and the quarantine that has disproportionately affected and killed the Black community and devastated our economies, our jobs, and our businesses. So that's as a backdrop. So today, the objectives to discuss what we want to go through is, what is the state of the Black community? What are the underlying causes? What we need to do to protect our mental health, both on a personal, a community, and a professional segment. And finally, what are some of the solutions? So let's jump right into it. Donna, talk to us. What is the state of the mental health in the Black community right now?
Okay, so thanks for inviting me. I always, mental health is my passion as a social worker that has been working in this field for the last 15 years or so. And so I'm always happy, it's always such a pleasure to talk about mental health and to talk in this forum, with my people. And so thanks again for inviting me. So I want to when we talk about mental health in the Black community, right, it raises a question, what is the state of Black mental health? And I think it's to our tenacity, it goes to our tenacity as a people, right? That for some of us, for most of us, we're doing relatively well, all things considered. So for most of us, we have been able to maintain a high level or some degree of good mental health, meaning at this point our mental health is not compromised. But we also have to consider that within the Black community at this time, and not only this time has only made things a lot worse, but the Black community has been in a state of mental health crisis for a while now, right? And this, for a lot of us, this was the tipping point. This has been, in fact, the breaking point in terms of the mental health crisis that the communities is experiencing. And what is also crucial to note is that, we're in the state of this mental health crisis, but we're also having mental health workers like myself who are experiencing burnout, right? So there were not a lot of us to begin with, right? In terms of Black people who are able to specialize in treating and providing support to the diverse Black community. But what we've noticed in the last year or so, and especially this since the beginning of this year, in the beginning of the pandemic, that a lot of us are ourselves experiencing a burnout and
Mhm.
our own mental health issues, that we are not able to provide the level of care that we previously did to our clients. And so that's only that this is only making things worse. And when we talk about too, in terms of what that means, the implications of not having the culturally safe, culturally affirming care out there for the diverse Black community, that this is only, um, all of this is just added to the crisis.
Okay, okay. So,
Mhm.
you know what? Help me understand. What are some of the factors that's contributing to the current mental health crisis going on? What are the factors?
Okay, so the factors can be broken down into three, if we want to say, into three main subgroup. First, we have the social factors, right? And
Mhm.
then we had more systemic factors. And we had like historical factors, right? So when we talk about social factors, what we're talking about is is social inclusion, right? The lack of opportunity, you know,
Mhm.
the impact of anti-Black racism, right?
Mhm.
Which you alluded to earlier. And anti-Black racism is different from all kinds of racism, right? Because
Mhm.
anti-Black racism is a special kind of racism that is reserved for Black people. And so a lot of us throughout this time, a lot of, in terms of the first to lose jobs, the first to be,
Very true.
you know, in terms of the last hired, the first to be fired, all of this, right? So all of those things. But when we talk about that, we also have to talk about everything that has gone on in terms of the marginalization and the exclusion and all of that. So those are all the social factors, right? But when
Mhm.
we talk about systemic factors, so when we talk about systemic factors, we're talking about all of the major systems and our interactions as Black people with them, and that the major system to a large extent is being extremely hostile to us, and that it has not served our needs, right? And
Mhm.
so when you look at it, we are a community, when you look at all the major systems, right, when we talk about the child welfare systems, we're a community of maybe in Toronto, like 9%, right? And yet 32% of our children are are involved in the child welfare system, right? When we look at our youth in Toronto, right, 9% of the school population, really our high school population, you know, are of are Black, but then the suspension, the expulsion rates are 50%, right? That's
Mercy.
the latest stat, right? So when
Mercy.
we look at the healthcare systems, we're not faring any better in the healthcare systems, right?
Mhm.
Because we're dying at a faster rate in the healthcare systems, right? So when you look at the judicial systems, then we know what happened there, right? And so those are all the systemic issues that we're talking about, right?
Mhm.
The structural issues, right? But
Yeah.
then when we look at the historical factors, there were some things that were previously there, right?
Okay.
And the gang and the gun violence, that has been there for years. We're disproportionately, as a community, we lose people, we lose children, especially. We as a community cannot put so many of our children in the ground and be okay, right? And
Correct.
so we have a history of gang and gun violence. But what we've also lost is our protective factors. And so now we are starting to see increased rates of suicide among diverse Black communities, where in the past, we didn't used to see that because we had protective factors, right? And so what we're seeing is that what has led to the crisis is that the community is experiencing what I would call a collective trauma, right? Where we're a community that we are in a state of trauma, right? It's been this way for a while,
Mhm.
but cumulatively, like everything is just, it,
Right.
increasing the layers, right?
Right.
And so and coupled with the fact that as a community, we have not been accessing mental health services to the need, to meet our needs. We have been trying to tough it out, right? We have been suffering, a lot of us, a lot of people in the community has in fact been suffering in silence. And so it's only now that every day, every other day that I'm getting people from the community that are calling to say, oh, I'm calling on behalf of so and so because they really need to see a psychiatrist. You know, they're experiencing depression or they're experiencing anxiety, and they really need to see a therapy. And this is something new because in the past, you know, we didn't access service, right? We just toughed it up and we dealt with it. But for a lot of us,
Yeah,
this has been the breaking point.
I want to stop you there because that's one of the things I really want to get into. I think there's a disproportionate access in our community. So traditionally, you talked about we're going through trauma, and man, you hit a lot of the key points dead on. What have we traditionally done what traditional perspective helped or hindered those suffering from mental health issues within our community?
Can I ask a question before you proceed to that,
Oh,
Anton?
I'm so sorry.
Because I'm putting my hand up in the chat, so I don't know if that is how I'm going to get recognized. I just click raise hand. So
Okay.
she mentioned, Donna mentioned protective factors,
Yes.
which I thought was so unique to me because I've never heard the term like that. Can she elaborate a little on what were some of those protective factors that we had and we probably don't have no more?
You know, Michael, I love that question. We're actually going to get into that shortly. So, would you mind it if I
No,
just
no, it's okay.
put a pinpoint on that because that's one thing
Yes,
we're actually getting to.
beautiful.
Perfect. So let's talk about traditionally, from a traditional perspective. Right now we're experiencing collective trauma, as you said. What have we done historically to get to this? And is that, or why is it working? And if not, why is it no longer effective?
So there's certain things that have worked for us in the past, right? So in the past, the strong connection to family has helped, right? Spirituality has helped, right? A
Mhm.
collectivist group mentality where we felt, you know, like we felt responsible for each other and we took care of each other, right? That has helped, and that for us, right, has been in terms of the way we were raised, it's collectivist. We cared about each other, right? But as a result of living in this culture for so long, and for those of us, the more we assimilate, the more we lose these things, right?
Mhm.
And so, as a result of living in this culture, where this culture is very individualistic, we are taught, whereas we are taught that from an Afrocentric way that we exist. I exist because we all exist, right?
Right.
But that's from an Afrocentric way. Eurocentric way is that we are on our own. We survive on our own. We all if we accomplish anything, we do this on our own, right? And we're responsible for ourselves. And so we take care of ourselves, and it's each man for themselves.
Mhm.
Whereas in the past, it took a village to raise a child, for example, right? These are the things that we were taught, that we were more connected to each other. And so now there's a disconnect. People are extremely socially isolated. The level of support that used to be there is not there. And so there's this, and so that is what has worked for us in the past, right? Right now, because of cultural erosion, the longer for those of us, right? Um, and so this is why you find that even people that come here from other countries, within 6 months of arriving in Canada, their mental health start to deteriorate, because we start to lose that as a result of the harsh realities of life, um, of living in this context, right? And so uh, the stuff that have helped us, the community, the sense of community, the pride, the racial pride, the proudness, all of these cultural things, right, that we relied on in the past, the more we assimilate, the more we've started to lose all of these things. And so for some of us, we're even experiencing like a crisis of identity. It's, so all of those commit, like, yes, living here has some benefits, right? Being in this environment has some benefits. But so for some of us, it becomes um such a huge factor, right, in compromising, and it threatens our mental health.
That is really interesting. So, really, as we really transition from a community to a more individualistic, it's really manifesting on us as a people.
Mhm.
That's okay. All right. So, you know what? With that, let's explore a little bit more. Mr. Michael there, he actually raised an interesting point because you mentioned earlier on what what we can do to protect. So, as a people, how have we learned to cope with some of these challenges with mental health? And two part, and second, what can we really do, as you said, some of the protective measures? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay, so first of all, what can we do to cope? So, I'm not going to ask this question because if usually, I ask this question of people and I always get the wrong answer. So usually when I say to people, what is the most important thing in your life, right? So usually, without fail, people will start to mention their partner, like making money, be successful, their children, all of these things, right? Because that's what we're socialized to think in terms of success and what is important in our lives, right?
Mhm.
But if you were to ask me that question, what do you suppose my answer would be?
Mm. You know what? Uh, your state of your own personal well-being and the being of people around
Wellness.
you.
Okay, right? And so, for those of us that are on this call this morning, the one thing I want you to if you forget everything else I say, then always remember that at all times the most important thing in your life should be your mental health,
Mm.
right? So the number one, the most important thing in your life should be your mental health. Because look at it this way, without proper mental health, nothing else matters. It
Mm.
doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter your potential, it doesn't matter, your brilliance, it doesn't matter how educated you are, it doesn't matter how big your brains are, it doesn't matter. Nothing else matters if you do not have good mental health, right? And so it's understanding as a community and as a people that our mental health is the most, should be, ought to be the most important thing in your life. If we start off from the position that if we don't have good mental health, nothing else matters, right? And so at all times, we have to protect and to guard and to do everything to fight, to sustain and to maintain good mental health. And so, in doing so, we have to identify the threats to our mental health, and we have to strategically decide how we want to deal with those threats to our mental health, right? And
Mhm.
so, for me, my mental health is the most important thing in my life, um, above my child, above my partner, above my job, above everything else, right? And
Mhm.
so, there's certain times when I have to be extremely selfish in guarding my mental health, right? Because without it, I have nothing. Yes, I'm going to walk around, but if I don't have a sound mind, what do I really have? If when we have good mental health, we're able to do everything. Without good mental health, we have nothing, right? And so we literally have to start from that place. We have to reprioritize in terms of what we deem to be important, because if we think our mental health are important, we'll govern ourselves accordingly, right? But
Mm.
if we don't, then we put everything else above our mental health, and then we don't even we don't even notice that our mental health is beginning to be compromised, right? And so what I want to say too is that the absence of a diagnosis does not mean that we're mentally well. Just because we don't have a diagnosis
Mhm.
doesn't mean that we're doing well, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the first part. That's the first thing I want to say is that we have to understand, right, and accept that, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
in terms of protective factors, it's the things that I say before is that we have to be preemptive, right? In terms of we have to come up with a plan. We cannot just take it for granted that we are just going to maintain optimal mental health without doing anything, right? We can't just think that okay, we're just our mental health is just going to be okay without actively working in order to maintain it, right? We can't just think okay, we won't have any good um, stress management strategy or any good self-care strategy that we don't have, um, we're not taking care of ourselves, right? That we're not reaching out for support, especially in this time. So we can't just think that we're just going to go every day and that we're just, and somehow miraculously our mental health is going to be maintained, right? Is that we literally have to do the things we need to do in order to protect our mental health, right? And so like I said, it's about community, it's about the connection, because second to our mental health should be the level of connection we have to each other, right? And to recognize who we are.
because we have a lot of ancestral strengths, right? You know, but I think the longer we live here, like I said, the longer we're in this, to some extent, to a lot of extent, hostile environment, then we tend to lose sight of the strengths and everything else that we have, right? And we start to want to do things on our own, not wanting to reach out to community, want to hide things, right? And wanting to tough this out, right? And then thinking we don't have the luxury. And I think it's a change of mentality. That's the first thing, right? We have to change our mentality about, oh, we previously thought about mental health and mental illness. That's the fundamental shift that we need to do.
That's actually, you know what, you're hitting a very interesting point. But before I come on to my next question, I see Mr. Michael there has a question. And it was, how do you know you're having a mental health problems? What are your initial signs?
And so this is the thing that I was alluding to, right? We can't wait until we have mental health signs, right?
Right.
When we're feeling relatively okay, right? When we're in a good space, you know, when things are going well, when we feel confident and strong, this is a time when we have to come up with the goals in advance to say, you know what, if this ever starts to happen, you know, we have to predetermine that, right? If it ever gets to the stage where I'm spending 2 days in bed, right? If it ever gets to the stage where I'm starting to avoid my friends' phone calls, right? Where I'm starting to isolate myself. If it ever gets to a stage where I'm starting to call in sick from work, if it ever gets to this stage, then I will know that, you know what, I'm starting to be increased, I'm starting to be vulnerable, and I need to access support. Because when we're in the middle of it, it's too late.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, because
Yes.
a lot of actions are to a certain extent assumed to be.
Is this the correct room?
Pardon?
Am I in the correct BBPA room?
Yes, you are.
Okay, because I wasn't sure about this.
Mona, it's
Yeah.
mental health one, not the financial literacy, but you're in the right place.
Okay, thanks. I'm good. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm awesome. I'm happy, healthy, thankful.
Anton, you're muted.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. So if in the event someone's been experiencing something for, you know, how many years, how do they then identify that, you know, me sleeping or just feeling is not me being lazy or being tired, but there's a real challenge? You said it's too late, but I agree with you. The best is to do it in advance. But
well, it's best to do it in advance, let's just say, yeah.
But if they're not in that scenario and they find themselves in there right now, or they think it's normal and the people around them identify and say, you know, that there's a problem, what happens then? How do they distinguish that they're not just being tired or they're feeling, it's not just regular being down, but there's a problem?
And so I think at that point, and this is why I say it's a change in mentality, right? And so this is when people start to really thinking about, okay, how am I going to access some support? And support might be informal at this time, in terms of reaching out, in terms of checking in with someone, and also having someone there that will sort of help to walk with you through the process. Right? Because when we're starting to experience that, like I said before, it's not a good time, you know, because our ability to make decisions become compromised, right? Because we start to have some deficits, right? In terms of cognition, maybe in the way how we think, it might be starting to get a little bit distorted. And so, yes, and so this is why I always say it's about, and this is one of the things I talk about too, is having someone there, right? That you identify in advance. Right? In order to say, you're going to be my support person. And if something were to happen to me, then, you know, you're the person I'm going to talk to so that you can support me through this. So it's putting all of these safeguards in place in advance.
Okay, so
But, it's like insurance, right? We may never need to
But
do
just-
these things,
yeah.
but it's good to just have them there in the event that we need them. They're already there.
Okay, very interesting. All right, let's what do we you talked about putting up the boundaries and making sure. Well, what are some of the services that we can access for culturally safe mental health treatment and support? So what they once they've identified.
And so this is why I talked about before, right? When I said that there are not a lot of them, right? But there's some within the community. We have, first of all, we have the program that I work with. It's for youth, and so it's situated at CAMH. It's a substance abuse program for African Canadian and Caribbean youth. It's the only program of its kind in Canada. And we have some flexibility to see Black youth from the diverse community up to age 29, right?
Mhm.
And then there's also CAFCAN, which is Caribbean African Social Services Association, right? There's some that are not maybe ethno-specific, but they're located in mostly racialized areas such as Delta Family Services, Tropicana, they're in the West End, for example, we have some of the community health centers, right? So we have like Regent Park Community Health Center, which is central. We have Taibu Community Health Center, which is in the Malvern area. That some of these, they might not be mandated to just serve the Black community, but they serve a high volume of people from the diverse Black community, right? We have Women's Health for Women's Hands downtown as well, which is more central. And then we have like other community health centers, just as Black Creek Community Health Center, which is in the Jane and Wilson area, I believe. Also Rexdale Community Health Center. So most of these community health centers, we have Reconnect, we have like places like Across Boundaries. So there are places out there that people are able to access support from and that are covered by OIP. In addition to other clinicians that are in private practice, some of them which would be covered by some insurance or that can provide services, mental health services on a sliding scale. Okay. So those are some of the ones that I can think of off the top of my head.
Perfect. We actually have a question coming through. Mr. Michael, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm a disruptor, so I don't want to disrupt.
No, that's okay. You know what? And not only to Mr. Michael, but to anyone else who's out there, feel free to ask questions. We have a unique opportunity to talk to Donna. She's a wealth of information. And that's the whole point of what we're trying to do, is to seek counsel, seek information, and share it amongst each other. So Michael, please go free. And anyone else, feel free to do the same as well.
Right, so
you can put your question in the chat itself, or you can raise your hand and you can ask itself directly.
Right, so I know Donna mentioned the signs and the condition, and she talk about, you're sleeping and not answering the phone and I deal with their friends. So, and I know probably in that field, there is not a laundry list of, like in accounting, if red flags. So the question I'm trying to ask her is, what are some of the initial simple red flags that you can see, like you're raising the kids and you notice the guy used to get up early and go jog and do his assignment, and this one morning he's not getting up, and the second morning does it, so you go and see what's happening here. I'm just trying to find if there's some major key initial signs that will say you are heading in the wrong direction before it becomes a crisis. If there's such a list or there's such a set of observations that one can look at. I know the COVID, for example, keep a lot of us in. You spend 23 hours physically in your little domicile. And I know that in of itself may generate some kind of a abnormal behavior. Should we start to look at those and say they're telltale signs that may get worse if they're not dealt with? And what would those signs look like? You mentioned a couple, but is there some other initial easy ones that we can see?
Well, it's different for everybody. It varies for everybody, right? And so for a lot of us, it really begins with a shift mentally, like in the way how we think, right? It's a cognitive shift in the way how maybe we start to feel hopeless. We start to feel, we start to feel pessimistic, right? So it could be as subtle as that, where we just start to feel, what is the point? Like, or a person, in terms of our personality, this shift could be as subtle as that. Whereas previously, you know, we were open to see people, but now it's like we're just exhausted. We find ourselves like really exhausted all the time.
And
Day
how would
after
that,
day.
how would that look to an external party? Because what you're saying is that I know my behavior, I know the things I
Yes.
used to do, and I know I'm changing. How would that look to an external party?
Like to a partner, for example?
Or to a good friend, or to an employer, or to a manager? How would that look? A father to a son, for example. How would I see those behaviors as my son change his mental thinking?
And so, yeah, so first it starts with the thinking, right? And that's what I was saying. The main thing to look for is social isolation. So when people start to socially isolate, when people don't even have the energy to engage in conversation, when, you know, that's when, or when self-care, if you know someone, when they start to avoiding you, you know, and they may start to express that, you know, what is the point? Things will never get better. I don't understand all of these things. They may start to verbally express things, right? But a lot of times, one of the number one things we look for, it's really when people start to socially isolate, right? When we start to avoid, because remember, you know, we are social beings. We are social beings, right? So when we really start to avoid people, that's when we know we're starting to, you know, to be vulnerable.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and let me piggyback on that question. So, say we identify someone that is socially isolating themselves. They don't see it as a problem. They just see that they're down, they're for whatever reason. How do we therefore know, okay, they see it's fine. We can identify as an external party, friend, partner, family, coworker, that, and how do we intervene if we start recognizing a clear shift? How do we, as an external person, intervene for someone else?
With a lot of persuasion. A lot of times people will check in one time, right? And they will assume that we only need to have one conversation about this. But a lot of times what usually happens is like, it's not a one-time conversation. It's a series of little conversations that we have. So we check in, we may text and we say, hey bro, like, sister, you doing okay? No answer. Hey sis, I'm really getting concerned. Are you doing okay? Please link me up, right? And so it's little conversations like that over a period of time, right? Where you do it with, you know what, I'm really concerned, you know what, I love you, I want the best for you, you know what, and sort of endorse it. I know this is tough. I mean, I know this is tough time, but you know what, I'm starting to see all of these changes and I'm getting really concerned. So it's not a one-time thing, right? It's a slow where it's a little bit of, you know, push and then a pull back, very slow, and it push and pull back over a period of time.
Okay.
Because a lot of people, they'll have the conversation one time, people will say, no, I'm fine. And then what they'll do is that they'll step back.
Interesting. Okay.
But that's not the way it really works.
Fair enough. Before I go to my next question, Laura has raised her hand. I think she has a question. Laura, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm so happy that this forum is taking place today. It's so needed and so important. So I have some questions, but I'll make it brief. The first question is in terms of racism and how much of an impact racism truly has on mental health, considering that it tends to trigger a lot of the mental health, such as anxiety, depression. It also goes into the physiological, such as heart attacks, obesity. It's spirit crushing. So how much is that really taken into existence? I do apologize for the background noise. I'm in a laundromat, so I'm multitasking. So then the second question that I had as well is in terms of trauma bonding. A lot of the times through my observations and through my experiences, I would go to work, I would be in social settings where I would hear non-white colleagues and friends saying that they have friendships with white people. However, you know, I really have to question what is friendship, considering that racism is designed to keep certain people in power, namely white people in power, and to do this through subjugation. So when it comes back to the trauma bonding, there's a lot of gaslighting. So if someone says, oh, there's racism that is occurring within the workplace, for instance, it's often denied. And the non-white person who's made that allegation is often deemed as, you know, somehow being difficult, not seeing things clearly. You know, there's just a lot of gaslighting, and it creates a double bind. And that double binding, as Donna, as you may be aware, can lead to things like schizophrenia. So, you know, my question there is the real impact of trauma bonding, because it really makes it hard for people to identify and recognize when there are so many external forces suggesting otherwise. Thank you so much.
Okay. So I'm glad you raised that issue because,
Great.
you know, like
Points.
I have to say that most of the work that I've been doing since maybe April, since right after, you know, George Floyd's death, a lot of the work, 95% of the work that I've been doing, right, is going into organizations and major systems, right, whatever ministries in you know, in Toronto, to do work with the staff along racial trauma, right? I'm booked up until March of next year because most of the work that I've been doing has focused around racial trauma, specifically racial trauma in the workplace. So that's the bulk of the work that I've been doing. We are now just scratching the surface of the impact of racial trauma, right? It's only now that we're really coming to terms with how, you know, with how devastating racial trauma is, right? To us, right? Because remember, I talked about anti-Black racism before, right? So for those of you that don't know, racial trauma is really the trauma that results from repeated exposure to racism and to microaggressions and to macroaggressions in society. So it's a mental effects, it's a psychological effects, and it's a physical effects, right? So a lot of us, we are at risk every single day for being traumatized, right? And so even now I'm doing some work with the psychiatry students at U of T, with the medical students there, and with the other psychiatrists to say, you know what? We need to put racial trauma as an official diagnosis, because we have a book called the DSM-V, right? And so the DSM-V is a book that outlines, it's like a Bible for mental illness that outlines, you know, all the mental illnesses, but racial trauma is not included in the DSM-V. And that's because the people that write the DSM-V are people that can be oblivious to racial trauma because they never in their lifetime will ever be exposed to racial trauma, right? And so when we talk about the impact of racial trauma, when I do presentations on racial trauma, my slides for psychological effects are like 3 slides, right? Then you have the physical effects of racial trauma. And then you have the mental health impact of racial trauma, right? So, you know, so now people with racial trauma, the tendency is to diagnose them with post-traumatic stress disorder. People with racial trauma, it can never be post because it can never be in the past. Every single day we're re-traumatized. And,
it doesn't even have to happen to us, right? So when we talk about racial trauma, we're also talking about vicarious racial trauma when we see it happening to other people. And so I've not watched Ahmaud Arbery's or whatever. I've not watched all of these deaths because it's not something that I, even as a mental health provider who have lost numerous clients over the years to suicide, it's not something that an image that I want to have in my mind, right? And so when these things happen, right, there were a lot of people that were saying, Donna, I've never felt this way before. I've never felt this way before, right? And what they've said is that I am being traumatized, right? But it's not only the racial trauma, right? So you have on one end, you have racial stress. And then it's on a continuum, you have racial stress, you have racial trauma, and then at the other end of the continuum, your racial battle fatigue, where we are exhausted. We are exhausted, our minds, our souls, our spirits. We are exhausted from just the combat, from having to respond and to live with this trauma, right? And to go into work and to go into our place of business every day and to pretend that we're okay, right? To hold it together, to be strong, not to be vulnerable, when in fact we are not okay, right? So we are battling, and so a lot of us will describe that we are just exhausted at this point, and there are not a lot of venue for us to talk about it, right? There was a CBC reporter that I was speaking to, and there was a noose that was found on a construction site downtown. And so she asked me, she said, oh, you know, the worker that found it, the noose, he just cut it down and he resumed working. And I said, what would you have him do? It is not a safe space for him. If you're finding a noose in your place of employment, chances are it was put there by one of your co-workers. You cannot allow yourself to be vulnerable in that position. I can assure you that on his way home from work, or when he's at home in the safety of his home, then he might cry and he might allow himself to experience these feelings. But how do you know among your co-worker who put that noose there, right? And so, yes, my sister, I'm really glad you brought it up, because this is exactly, and we have been experiencing this for years, right? But now, you know, it's just that right now it's at the forefront. It's a tipping point for most of us. And like I said, we are only just now starting to fully understand.
And also, sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
So sorry. Thank you so much, Donna, for your information and insight, because it's so much needed. And I'm wondering if it can also be included in the training, that for trainers, especially in nonprofit social work where it's direct care professionals, that they do not say when a client is being racist towards them, that it's okay and to just brush it off, because there's been too many times in training sessions where these things occur, and it's traumatizing to the worker who's experiencing it, not only mentally but physiologically. And there's actually policies that have this as a protected class to prevent these things, but they're not being utilized. And then when that worker comes up and says, hey, this is what a client is doing, or hey, this is what a fellow staff is doing, then again, they become even more traumatized because their allegations are trivialized. They become ostracized because now instead of looking at the issue, they become the issue, and the organization is too busy defending their own image than to really tackle the issue and to resolve it. And there's too many people that have lost their jobs because of this. There's too many times that promotions haven't occurred because of this. And racism just seems to be an undergird. And for those who tend to practice it or feel that they are aware or unaware, whatever the case that be, I don't care what the perpetrator thinks. This is the impact, and we're at a stage of survival, I believe, at this point. Thank you so much again.
Well,
just very briefly, do you want to go, Anton? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do, because I want you to respond to it. Laura had mentioned something earlier on. Someone was asking a question on what exactly is double binding, but please don't make that lose track, because I want you to respond to her statement there. But what is double binding was one of the questions being asked.
The double binding is you experience racism, right? And when you complain about racism, then you experience racism at a significantly, so you experience racism, you complain, but now they really pile it on. They really pile on the oppression. They really put the screws onto you. They really fix you until they break you. So that's double bind.
Okay.
So,
thank you so
to-
much. Yeah, you know what?
Yes.
It's actually fine. Rochelle has her hand up. I'm about to let her ask a question. It's actually ironic that you're saying that. I remember when I was at U of T, I was in the lecture hall. There was probably 700 to 900 people in the hall. And I remember there was a comment said, it just as to reiterate what you're saying. And they were talking about racism in society. And I remember someone stood up and said, you know, in the States, they have a real problem up there, but thank God we live in Canada where there's no real racism up here. And, you know, I sat down there and my response was a little bit different. And I said, you know, I agree. And, you know, there's no real such thing as menopause. And I really think that, you know, period pains are made up, and, you know, labor pains, it's nothing. And there was this big offense. And I'm like, well, you guys caught the point. How can you talk about something that you've never experienced? If it's not directed towards you, you won't even understand what the reference is. So you're hitting such phenomenal points. With that said, let's go over to Rochelle. Rochelle Solomon has her hand
But
raised.
can I just briefly respond to Laura, what she said?
Oh, sure. I'm so
Just-
sorry. Please go ahead,
Yeah.
please.
So I'm glad you raised the point, Laura, because, okay, so this is it, right? In the work that I do, right? And I think for some of us in the Black community, especially, right? We're conditioned, we're socially conditioned that if we're brilliant, then somehow that insulates us from racism, right? And so some of the work that I do with people are brilliant people, right? You know, the doctors, the students that I work with, to say, you know what, I am strong. I can work a 37-hour shift back to back in the ER and I'm fine. But the moment one of my patients call me the N-word, somehow I just crumble. That is so devastating to me, right? The lawyers that I work with say, listen, you know I can do this. And it, you know, it doesn't matter what the other clients call, you know, what they say to me. But the moment they refer to me as the N-word, somehow that is so devastating to me, right? And so, yes, we are taught to work 3 times. We have to be 5 times better on all of this, right? Which is to our detriment. And so this is a function. This is why when I say that brilliance does not insulate us from racial trauma, right? And so this is how insidious racial trauma is, right? And so I just want to say at Black Mental Health Canada, we are planning to do some work in terms of racial trauma. So that's in the future, because right now, like people that hire me to come are like huge ministries and huge organizations, right? But I'm hoping to do some work around to build awareness on racial trauma in the community moving forward.
That's phenomenal. That's really is phenomenal. And it's so far needed. Thank you for that. Rochelle, go ahead with your question, please. So you raise your
Hello,
hand.
good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you very, very much for everyone that has put on this session and for Donna speaking. It's a topic that I've personally had interaction with, and I'm pretty sure all of us have gone through just situation where we just need the help and can't get the help or can't reach the help because we don't know where to start. And I think personally, I've gone through it. I've tried to contact resources, and the resources it's very hard. Although it's out there, it's very hard. And especially it's nice to hear that there is one at CAMH for the Black community. However, going through the process of getting there is not an easy process. So my question basically is, how do you get directly there, knowing that you're an African-American, knowing that you have this struggle? And I have about education where I can see the signs, I know the signs, and I have an individual which was going through it, but can't access the resource. And I just want to emphasize the fact of taking care of your mental health, as you mentioned before, is important, especially when you're healthy and aware to do that. And it's only something that you as an individual has to claim and start doing on an everyday basis to help yourself not to get there, but your individual and your loved ones and the ones that surrounds you will be the one to uplift you when you, or even if you do get there.
Interesting. Over to you, Donna.
Yes, and this is one of the, as an advocate, as a mental health advocate, which is above all my other roles, this is what this is the one that I'm more passionate about. And so this is why I always talk about the need in our community to build resources, right? When I go speak to the students, to the medical student, I say, you know what, as a community, we don't have enough Black psychiatrists. You guys need to consider psychiatry as a specialty, right? When I speak to the students, I say, you know what, we need to build our capacity to provide services within our own community, right? And so right now we're building capacity, but in order to find the services, you have to be very determined, right? You have to be open really about your need, to ask, to network, just the same way how we network, right? And so we haven't talked about stigma yet, but we'll get to that, right? We have to get to the place where we can open it, just like how when we need a plumber, we'll say, oh, I need a Black plumber. Do you know anybody? And we go through and somebody would say, I know a guy. And because we in the Black people, we always know a guy for something, right? And so, but it's about being tenacious in order to because even when we meet Black people, right, it's even finding the right fit. So don't be discouraged when, like depending on where you are, like I said, if you're in Toronto, there's Women's Health for Women's Hands. Oh, the program at CAMH, we go up to, we have some flexibility up to 29. But you can also, if you're accessing service from a major organization such as CAMH, it's okay to ask for a Black therapist. So in the intake process, you can say to them, I have cultural needs, and my cultural needs is really to say, wherever you go, whether it's Mount Sinai or Toronto General or whatever, it's okay to say to them, you know what, I am of African descent and my cultural need is to have a service provider that can provide service to me, that can provide culturally affirming, culturally safe services to me, right? And they can say yes or they can say no, or most of the time they do have, and they're able to match you with these resources, but they won't know unless you ask for it, right? And as publicly funded healthcare institutions, they are responsible morally, ethically, and legally for having your needs met. It's okay to be vocal about what your needs are. But I think a lot of us, we're a little bit shy about saying, I need a Black therapist or I need a Black mental health service worker. We have to get past that. We have to be bold in asserting ourselves and saying, you know what, this is something we need and this is something we're entitled to, and we're not going to stop until we get the person that's the right fit for us. We have to be unapologetic is what I'm saying.
I really love to hear that, because it's like we've been socialized really to kind of disassociate ourselves from specifically asking for ones that match us. I think what a phenomenal point. I want to raise next and go over to Jasmine Beatty. She had a question. Jasmine, go ahead.
Yes. Hello, everyone. So I don't know if most of you guys saw in the chat, but I work at an organization right now as an LGPC. And currently I've noticed that specifically with our Black young boys at my organization that I work for, they're usually treated a lot differently when they are presenting certain behaviors than, their other classmates who may be white or out of their demographic. What I often notice is instead of, I guess, doing the work on their own as far as admin and different or other clinicians who are not Black, they often go to me always to be the one to say, hey, can you go handle this? Can you talk to this person about it? Can you do this? Can you do that? Even to the point where around the George Floyd situation, when I spoke up and said, the way you guys have handled this, you guys haven't checked on our mental health, specifically your organization is made up or comprised of mostly African Americans. You guys haven't checked up on us to see how we are doing, if we're even able to manage, if we are okay to even be providing services. And because I spoke up, they used me now as the spokesperson, which I am grateful for. But it's the way it happened to be the chair of now the DEI committee at my organization. So now it's now my job to teach them and to provide training opportunities for them. Something I didn't really ask for. I just wanted to address my concerns. I wanted it to be known that I see you guys are not addressing this need. I see that you guys are always using me as the token person. And then it flipped on me. And then now I am in charge, you know, of making sure that I am educating them. And now I'm the one that's supposed to, you know, make sure that everyone basically to undo all those years of whatever they've been exuding as people. Now it's like my job to undo all that and to teach them. So I just wanted to know an appropriate way and polite way to respond moving forward when they come to me, looking for me to be the savior, you know, almost of the Black community, if that makes sense.
You raise a good point, and thank you so much for mentioning that, because a lot of us, if we're conscious, right, if we understand what's going on, and when we're vocal about it, then you're right, we become the default person, right? Which, when I say, this is what contributes, right, to the racial battle fatigue that I mentioned earlier. And so, you know, the same thing happened to me in my own organization, where, you know, after all of this, and they came to me and they said, oh, we would like you to do some work with the staff, or there's work that needs doing, and we want to identify all of these people. And so I said, okay, I could give you a list of people that are able to come in and to do this work with the staff, because I'm too close to it, right? And so that's my thing, is like, why don't I provide you with some resources in order to do this, right? So I'm recognizing my own. So this is what I say to them, you know what, I'm too close to this, right? I'm too close to all of this. I think it would be more beneficial if somehow you would access some third party, someone else that could come in and to do the work that needs to be done.
Okay, yes.
Because it's perfect. A lot of, so in addition to your regular work, then this is an added work, right? And it's a lot of emotional labor that you should not be expected to take on. And so my caution for all of us, that we're in environments where we are being asked to do this, that we have to then, you know, protect and maintain our own mental health. And so when I said there was things they wanted me to do, and I said, no, I'm sorry, I cannot do this. And they said, okay, but we're going to ask so-and-so. And then I would pick up the phone and call so-and-so and said, listen, if you do that, I will fight you. You will not do this for free. Let them get someone else to do this work, because you have to guard yourself against burnout.
Absolutely.
You know, like, yes, we're being expected to take on too much, right? And it's the whole thing about, you know, allyship, which I won't even get into. All of that, right? Because I have my own opinions about that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
This is some really interesting conversation, which is really indicative of some of the challenges in the community itself. So those that know, I've seen a lot of hands going up, and I will be getting to you. I'm not ignoring you. We're going through a few of them. There's a few questions going through. I really love where we're going here, and we're hoping to get to you guys all as quickly as possible. With that said, let's go back over to Mona. Miss Mona had a question for you.
Yes, good morning. My name is Mona Wallman. My question to the speaker is, in managing a person's spiritual aspect, towards this situation, do you support praying if this is part of their spiritual belief system?
Yes. And I, you know, like, when you say praying, if someone wants to pray, well, as part of the clinical intervention?
If the person belief system is, let's say it's a Christian, for example.
Yeah.
The person believes in prayer, and they have come to you with a mental health situation. How do you manage that with they disclose that to you? So how do you incorporate, or do you incorporate that into the situation since that's part of their belief system? How do you manage it?
Okay, and so this isn't something that comes up over and over again, right? And so we have to understand and accept that spirituality, praying, religion, in terms of African tradition, have been a source of strength, right? And it's been a protective factor for Black people, right? But at a certain point, it has worked to our detriment as well, right? I have people that, I've worked with people that never missed a Sabbath, meaning they would be in church, they would be at Sabbath right now, and then after Sabbath, they would go use cocaine, right? And so I think the church has come a long way in terms of really promoting mental health services, right? And so the way I look at it is like, you know what? Yes, God is helping us. And the way God is helping us, it's by providing us with the wisdom, the technology, and the treatment that are out there that can effectively treat mental health problems, right? So yes, we can do both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. But I think what has been detrimental to us in the past is, one of my clients would say, is that my family, they never wanted me to access services because they wanted to pray the cray array. Meaning, yes, they just wanted to pray, right? And we have a long history of this in the community where I work with people where it's clear that their children are experiencing psychosis. But instead of accessing service for that partner, that child or whatever, yes, they're praying. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with praying. I'm just saying that, yes, we could pray, but we also have to follow that. I think the Bible says faith without works is nothing, right? So yes, you pray, you have faith, but part of that is that you have to act too. And you have to act because the treatment, to be honest with you, we're not really concerned. As a mental health clinician, I can tell you this, we are not concerned about diagnosis at this point, right? What we are concerned about is people not accessing service and not adhering to treatment protocols. The treatment are so effective, the treatment are so varied, the treatment are so sophisticated, right? No matter what mental health problems you have right now, there's a treatment for it. There's like 20 treatment for every one problem. But the fact is that it doesn't matter how much treatment we have if people are not accessing treatment and if people are not adhering to treatment recommendations, right? So this is the thing. I'm not opposed to prayer, but I'm just saying, you know what? While you're praying, still access service. Don't just pray and accept, you know, because miracles come from acting as well.
Thank you, Fox. Thank you so much.
Faith without works is dead. That is absolutely so. Now we're going to raise up another hand. We have one of our very own, Roderick. By all means, please lift up your hand and go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. It's a
Good
pleasure
morning.
to be here and to have this conversation on the platform. Just a quick question. We know that there's a huge stigma around mental health and the Black community. And often people are very reluctant to even accept that they may have a mental health problem. And having been within the mental health sector for several years and working to help people in working with their quote unquote diagnosis or with their mental health issue, that was one of the issues that, again, first acceptance. So what would be one of the ways that you would suggest, Donna, for people to be able to bring the issue to like a loved one or a family member or whatever that may have been, to allow that person to know that there's a problem? What are some of the ways or the methods that you found effective so that people can get that early intervention? Obviously, as we know, the longer that somebody is experiencing a mental health issue, the more it compounds, and obviously then the more comprehensive sometimes the treatment may be. So what are some of the ways that we can get early intervention so that people can get that help earlier?
I think I spoke about this a little bit before, but I think what we have to understand with stigma is that there's a reason for the stigma, right? And if you want to look at it this way, the stigma has been there to some extent as a protective factor for us, right? So when I talk about stigma, you know, we conceive it as to be a bad thing, right? You know, in quotation, but the stigma has been there, and to some extent, historically, the stigma has helped us in our community because for a lot of us in the past, it's almost as if we think we don't have the luxury to be mentally ill, right? And I'm sure you've heard people say this before. What do you have to be depressed about? You have a roof over your head, you have food to eat, right?
Absolutely.
Especially when I speak to Continentals. I went to U of T to speak to some brilliant young people, brothers and sisters that came from Africa to study at U of T, right? And when they said that, they can't even tell their families that they're experiencing mental illness here, because the family would say, what do you have to be depressed about? You're getting free education at one of the best universities in the world. You have a roof over your head, you have food to eat. Don't tell me you're depressed, right? And for a lot of us, because it's misunderstood, right? And so the stigma has been there for a reason. A lot of us, we feel guilty about even endorsing mental illness because we're thinking, what do we have to complain about? Our ancestors have been through so much, right?
And I think also is that, we've been told so often that we're strong, we're tough, and, there's no room technically for any type of vulnerability. So that obviously compounds people even wanting to seek help, from my experience also.
Exactly. And so when we are talking to people about seeking help, this is a conversation that we have with them, where you endorse it at first to say, you know what? I know that it's hard for us. And you say us, right? You don't say you. You say, I know, it's hard for us, really, because we have a long troubled history with mental illness as Black people. And you endorse the reasons that we just talked about, right? And you said, you know what, but moving forward, it doesn't have to be this way, right? That this is what we did in the past. And I understand because I also internalize the same thing, right? And we talk about we didn't even talk about internalization yet, which is a huge thing, right? Because this is only a 90-minute conversation. How much can we talk about, right? But certainly when we're talking to people about accessing service, we have to endorse those, and then we go into how we want to support them and what we want to do. So that's how we lead. We say, you know what, listen, we know that we're used to holding things down. We know that we have to be strong. We know all of these, but you know what? We're human beings, right? And then that's how you do it, right? You have you endorsed it before. So all of the things that they've internalized, you put a voice to it. And then you offer to support them through the process. And like I was saying before, it's not just a one-time conversation. It might take 6 or 7 or 12 times before they're receptive, because it's going to take them a while to get over this long, process of dealing with the internalization.
Thank you.
This is some great conversation, but let's continue going, because in the last little while, I want to relate to how we can go to business. But before we get to that as it relates to business, there's a few more hands been raised. Demi's been in the queue for a while. Demi, go ahead and raise your point.
Hello. I hope I don't offend anyone by being here, but I just want to hear everyone's points. But I just wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on mental health and what nutrition and fitness you're doing, whether that affects anything? I think it does massively, but I just wanted to get your thoughts on it.
And this is, for some people, I do a racism recovery plan. And so for some of my clients, and what I do, I go into organizations and I work with staff, racialized staff in the organizations, in terms of developing a racism recovery plan, right? And which are 6 steps, which is, it's about developing your toolbox and accessing your support and knowing the warning signs and preparing for crisis and all of these things, right? And so that's one of the things I talk about, the importance of self-care, the importance of taking care of ourselves, right? Too many of us are putting everything ahead of ourselves and are really not taking care of ourselves, right? And for those of us in the community, we've all known young people that lost, young warriors within the community, right? That died too early. And the reason why they died too early is because they were so focused on taking care of the community needs, taking care of everybody else, that they never exercised. They never took care of themselves. They never, those basic stuff that we need to do. I exercise an hour a day. And the way I look at it is that it's a gift that I give myself, right? So if I'm going to take care of everybody else for 60 minutes out of every day, if there are 24 hours in the day, one of those hours belong to me in order to exercise and to make sure that I take care of my physical body. So I think that's something that goes hand in hand. Without mental health, like we talk about physical health, right? But without good mental health, we can't have good physical health, right? And so it's linked, right? When we talk about health, mental, physical health go hand in hand.
Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Demi. Over now to Monica.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, first I want to say thank you. It's super interesting. I've never heard a conversation like that is so fixated on Black people, which is really important. I have many questions, but I'm just gonna ask two to be short. First, you talked about how in our community, you said that we're kind of taught that if you're smart, you won't experience racism. Could you just kind of go deeper on that?
Okay, so I think for most of us, right, we were socialized, right, that we have to be much smarter. We have to work harder. This was from the time we were young, some of us, from the time we were 5 or 6, right? It's like you have to get a good education. You have to be smart. You have to be that much better in order to compensate or to make up for the level of oppression or the barriers that are in the way, right? And so a lot of us, we fixated on that, right? And we delude ourselves really into thinking, you know what? If I'm on top of my game, if I'm the best in my company, right? If I'm the best in everything I do, if I aspire to excellence, right? Then somehow I'm going to be insulated from racism. But usually what ends up happening is that we become a threat. And so the people that are mediocre, they're not targeted because they're mediocre. They're not a threat. Okay. And so we that now we're excellent, now we're good, now we're on top of our game, now we're seen as a threat to be eliminated. And so now now all the focus is on us, right? But but somewhere along the way, from a Eurocentric lens, we're thinking, you know what? It doesn't matter. My race doesn't matter as long as I'm good. And by the time we figure out that, you know what, this is not the case, by now our mental health is so severely compromised that now it's a process of rebuilding ourselves, right? Because now it starts to affect every single aspect of our life. We lose confidence, we lose, our sense of self. And so there's a young lawyer that I worked with, she was only 27, that was best at everything. I mean, this girl went to law school full-time. She worked full-time and went to school. This is how driven this girl was, right? She was the president of the Law Society. She was president of everything. Now she's working and racism hit her, right? And just eroded everything. And so part of the work that I did with her is just to rebuild her sense of self, her confidence, her self-esteem. And so she said to me, you know what, Donna, I know the law. And if they take away the law from me, what do I have left? And I said, first of all, they cannot take away the law from you. Whatever is in your head is in your head. You cannot allow yourself. And so my thing is that there's nobody out there that's going to allow that I'm going to give power to allow them to compromise my mental health. Nobody. I don't care if you're the neighbor or the man down the street or the person it's not going to happen. And so, you know what? A lot of times we think, okay, that's what, it's a fallacy, if we're brilliant. And so, I was wondering about her, but a few weeks ago, she texted me, she said, just to let you know, I'm doing good, because she's currently going through a lawsuit with her previous employer, right? And I said to her, you know what? You, my dear, are a mighty daughter of Africa. You will be well, right? Because, everything was so eroded. So it's a process of building up. Yeah, a lot of our young people especially, right? Mercy. The racism hit them like a ton of bricks because they were so focused on being brilliant, they never developed a plan.
Thank you. And my second question was, you said that we need to put our mental health first. But what do you do when, like, I'm in school and because of COVID, there's a lot of things happening all at the same time, and you don't really have time to sit down. Like when you're done studying for one thing, there's the next thing, and then there's something you have to do, then there's a family member that's sick, and then, oh my God, and then it's 3 months ahead and you haven't done anything, but you have done everything. How do you stop yourself from feeling overwhelmed and feel like you're letting yourself down while still doing what you have to do?
So this is it, right? It says self-care and stress management. It's maintenance. It's called maintenance, right? And so at all times, no matter what's happening, if you put your mental health first, then you will practice maintenance, right? Self-care, first of all, stress management strategies, that's non-negotiable, but also self-care that has to be incorporated into your day-to-day practice. So it has to be very intentional. It has to be a priority, right? It has to be scheduled, planned, and predictable. It can't be just something that you don't schedule like how you schedule every other aspect of your day. My time is scheduled. Like whatever I'm doing, it's scheduled.
Thank you.
I thank you so much. I'm going to start expediting simply because we're running out of time and there's some major points I want to hit on. So I'm going to ask the last few questions. If you can make your questions as concise as possible, not because I don't think it's valuable, but because there's so much great information, I want to get as much as possible. Over to you, Emmanuel.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hi, all the way from London, England. A very short background. In 2015, I was diagnosed with psychosis. I have no family experience of practices of mental health issues. I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act in England. And since then, my recovery has gone very well, and I'm making use of all the resources, health, medicine, so on and so forth. My background is actually in architecture. I did very well at school, completed my degree, and afterwards I had my experience. I'm very interested in how buildings, you think, if it does at all, play a part in our mental health. For instance, you know, how our environments around us, landscape, physical, seeing derelict buildings, the communities in which a lot of perhaps Black people in the UK, I don't know about Canada and America, that are surrounded by, how much of this can actually play a role, perhaps more so in terms of our hopes and our aspirations. And I'd love to get your opinion on that, Donna.
On how the environment?
Yes,
in terms of the physical environment?
Yes.
That's a huge factor. So when we look at the cause of, in terms of the threats, what I would call the threats to our mental health, right, then that certainly would be a threat to our mental health, right? Because when if you're in environments where it's broken down, where it's neglected, where you're on the margins, right? Because if you're in that environment, that would suggest that you're on the margin, what we would call marginalization and social exclusion, right? And so it affects your self-worth, right? And that affects that becomes internalized, where as a result of the physical environment you're in, then that starts to impact, because somehow you start to relate that to your own self-worth, right? And so that becomes so internalized. And before you know, the sense of hopelessness start to set in. And so even with psychosis, right? Like there's so many, we talk about the genetic, the environmental factors, and certainly, you know, those are some of the factors. So when we look at it, yes, we have all of these biological, physiological impact on mental health, but certainly the environment is a huge thing, because what it does, it erodes our sense of self, right? And once that starts to go, then we start it's like, you know what, you have a kid and then you tell the kid is no good. After a while, the kid, no matter how brilliant the kid is, the kids start to believe they're no good. It's the same as being in an environment where you're not told you're no good, but everything around you would suggest to you and give you the message that you're no good. And so consequently, you start to internalize that. And that means you start to behave and act in a manner that you're no good. It's a similar link. Environment has a lot to do with it. And that's why I say that some people, you know, they come to Canada within 6 months of coming here. they lose their mental health, literally lose their mental health.
Mercy. Mercy. All right, you know what? We're going to transition because there's some real great questions. I will try so we can get to it, but I want to really tie us in, particularly one key factor that we haven't really touched upon yet is how it affects mental health people in the business. I will also try to also get to some of the other hands that are still raised. I see some are being there, but let's talk about business. How, what are some of the biggest triggers that people that can expedite the challenges within the workplace?
Yeah, and I talk about this before, which is why companies have been, have been hiring me to come in to do the work with their staff, right?
In that case, because let's just say differently. What rights and resources? Let me ask another question then.
What rights?
What rights and resources can someone suffering from mental health challenges draw upon in the workplace settings?
I think in the workplace. Specifically in the workplace, we have a lot of times, a lot of people suffer in silence within workplace settings because, there's a fear if they say something, they're going to be targeted, right? And so the issue is, how do you mobilize within your current setting, right? How do you access support? How do you promote mentorship, right? How do you speak collectively as a group? Because a lot of times, if you try to do it on your own, you won't be successful. And so how do you, really speak and develop your own capacity to lead? Because a lot of times we're looking at the other people to lead, right? And so how do we take that leadership, the responsibility to as people of African descent, of Black people, especially ones that are experiencing anti-Black racism within the workplace disproportionately, how do we really develop our critical thinking skill, our conscious level, to lead with that level of confidence and to form a coalition, right? I'm not really suggesting that we do this on our own. This is where the part about, collectivist, the Afrocentric ways, this is when it becomes beneficial to us, right? And so even if we're just the only one within our workplace, how do we access within our industry, right? How do we access that so that we as a coalition, as a collective, can advocate for the changes that we need? Because I would suggest there's some things that individually we can advocate forward, but my approach is always, at all times, how do we form a coalition? How do we mobilize together? How do we build our consciousness and our awareness together?
I think that's really phenomenal because you've mentioned a lot of hot points, drawing upon even my personal experience and some of the experiences of those around me. Working in the Fortune 500, I've seen experiences where an individual, a Black individual, hired someone to become their admin or their assistant, and that person got promoted to become their boss. I've seen scenarios where someone is doing exceedingly well and then starts getting attacked from all angles, and all of a sudden now they no longer have the confidence, so they've actually broken them psychologically. And it's great that you mentioned that we need to make a coalition together. Do you know of any resources to build out? Because if someone doesn't know them, where do they know to reach out to? How do they know, where do you get the For example, in my career, I've been in the corporate, I've been in the startup, I've been in Canada, US, and Europe, and I've never had a mentor. I've never had one my entire career.
But have you actively, intentionally accessed a mentor?
Because
you have to. There's a medical student, I gave a talk, and she came up to me and she said, "Donna, I need you to be my mentor." And I said, "But you're a medical student, like I can't mentor you with medicine." She said, "I don't need you for that. I need you to mentor me in how to advocate and how to build my capacity for this, and this. This is what I need you for." A lot of us, we have to intentionally go out there and ask people.
I'll say this because I think you're bringing up a phenomenal point, but we are not even socialized to know to ask those questions. It's only as you progress and matriculate through your career, you start to see other people experiencing, and you're like, oh, maybe I should be doing that too. And I think that's part of, we've been socialized to think in a certain way as an employee and being a good employee and doing this, but not really given a lot of the tools to, optimize our own.
So Aston, That is why we've got the BBPA right now.
I was about to bring that up. And I think that is one of the key things. I think that this environment, this channel, this resource being the BBPA is really there to really help. And I really wish we were able to disseminate that more. So for those that are on the line, I want to thanks. Please continue to disseminate that question out. But is there any additional thoughts or resources that you can think of?
I know, like, there's some professionals. So for whatever, what I can say is that for whatever professional organization you belong to, if there's not, for whatever background you are, right? For most of them, they're professional organizations that exist, whether they exist here in Canada or in Toronto. So it's not about just localizing in Toronto, right? It's about pushing like further in scope. Perhaps that we don't have a Toronto right now. You know, we're talking about building a Black social workers association of social workers in Toronto, but there's one in Nova Scotia. So we're asking for help from the one in Nova Scotia to build a Toronto chapter. So whatever you're involved with, it's just about doing the research to say, you know what, maybe they don't, you know, not exist in the Greater Toronto area, but does one exist in Calgary or, you know, wherever? And can I be a part of that? And how can they mentor me in order to form a Toronto chapter? Or how can I get support from them? You know, we have a mental health support group, and we have people calling all the way from Tennessee to access our mental health. It's a group for mental health service providers. We have people calling from all over because you know what? The need for gathering, for fellowship, for reasoning among Black people is so strong that we find each other. Right? And so if we look hard enough, we tend to find each other somehow, especially in the age of, you know, virtual thing, right? It's amazing how we're able to just connect and to find each other.
You're absolutely correct. We're just about out of time. You know, I want to bring up, there are some great points. Ashley had her hand raised and there was another one brought up, but another one to actually bring it through, but we're running out of time. But the good news is we're coming back again next week, same time, to actually continue the conversation. And I think as a community, this is actually phenomenal. For those who are on the line, please disseminate this information to your friends, to your colleagues, to all those ones, because this is something we need to discuss more as a group. We may continue to go a few more minutes, but as I said, we are just about out of time. I want to thank you. Before I do, I know Ashley has her hand raised for quite some time. Ashley, I'll allow you to raise your hand real quick. And if there is one, I'll try to get one more point after that. Ashley, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll make my question quick. I was just curious, like how you suggest folks navigate their therapeutic journeys if they cannot access a Black therapist because of logistics or funding. I was faced with that issue and have continued to be faced with it. So I'm just curious what your suggestions for that is.
So if that's not an option, then you can, so what I would suggest is that you carefully interview who your provider is, and you can ask them. And so one of the questions I usually, you know, when I'm doing this work, you know, you ask them, you said, okay, how comfortable are you talking about race and racism? Are you a little bit comfortable, not so comfortable? Like, you know, you can literally, I wouldn't suggest that but you can train, you can certainly build capacity, you know, in the person that you're working with, if that person is not from the Black community, right? So you can ask them, right? And you can say, you know what, this is important to me. You know, I want to know how you feel about this. And I want to know if you're going to be capable of discussing these issues openly with me. I understand that you're from whatever, but I need to know that you have a willingness to learn, that you're interested in building your own capacity, because not all of us are in areas where we have diversity, right? But that's not to say that we should deny ourselves the benefits of therapy if we don't have, you know, culturally safe therapists out there. We can work with people from the dominant culture if we don't have a choice, but it's not something that we can be blind to. We have to talk about it openly and honestly, and to say that, you know what, I do have this concern. Like, let us talk about it, like how we're going to navigate this thing together. So, but we have to be, the ones that need the services, have to be proactive in doing so. So I would say, you know what, put it out there as openly and honestly as you can. These are my needs, right? And so if these are my needs, how do you think we can work at meeting these needs together? How can we work together collaboratively?
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Well, again, I want to thank, well, I have one last question as I thank Donna for coming out today. And again, remember, for all that's on the line today, we will be back again next week. This is such a pertinent issue, but we'll come from a slightly different angle, talking more about how we're dealing with the quarantine and COVID specifically. Please share this information with all those, for those that need to get additional information and resources and call and follow up with Donna herself. She has put her number in her contact information in the chat group itself. I want to thank you for that. Last question, because it was asked earlier on, but it's a little deep one, but we'll leave on that one because it's a little transcending. There's a question that was asked by Vanessa, and Vanessa said, can we, bye, Debbie, bye.
Bye. I just wanted to say bye and thank you. Sorry for butting in. Take care.
No worries. The last question is, it's a bit of a deep one, and we might have to transition this one over to next week. But just high level, if you can give some transgenerational racial trauma and its effect on the mental health of the Black people, particularly those of Caribbean descent. I began to wonder if physically being isolated in our island communities have allowed outdated and poor mechanisms to survive longer through the generation in our communities and culture. These poor coping methods coming out with us no matter where we migrate to. What are your thoughts on that?
What are the thoughts on, just say that again, I was
really transgenerational effects and isolation in the Caribbean people from Caribbean descent. What are your thoughts on that? It's a bit of a big one, and we might have to just push that one over to next week when we actually bring this back again. But if you can give any high level thoughts on what's the transgenerational impact in our community, and specifically, do we see anything with and its effects on the Caribbean in our isolationist mentality?
So the impact, okay.
Well, the actual, I'll read the actual question if you like again.
Yeah.
Can Donna please speak a little on transgenerational racial trauma and its effect on the mental health of Black people, particularly those of Caribbean descent? Okay. I begin to wonder.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
I'm able to speak now.
I love it. Please go ahead.
Thank you for slipping it in at the end. And I don't want to take too much time, but I see that I might not be coming through in my words. So I'm just saying, I've learned a lot through platforms and programs such as these. So thank you for putting this on, about transgenerational racial trauma. I am not an academic, I am not a psychologist, but I do believe, I'm coming to believe that this is true. And that has impacted our mental health as Black people, strongly. And then I began to wonder, hearing more about, the poor coping mechanisms developed, which helped us at the time, survive, the tragedy of slavery, things of that nature, but no longer help us now. And I was just wondering, has anyone, touched on, the Caribbean community, and I'm just beginning to wonder on my own, whether some of these, outdated coping mechanisms have survived longer in our communities and culture, just due to the physical nature of being, on an island, and just,
I love where I think you're going, but I think that's going to be a fairly deep question. It's going to take some type of response. What I'm going to ask you to do is bring your question back next week, because right now we're just about, we're out of time already, because that one's going to take a little bit of mustard to kind of respond to. And I don't think we'd be able to give it enough time to give it an effective response. So
Okay.
remember the question, bring it back next week. Is that fair?
Okay. Well, I hope to be able to join again next week. Thank you.
I'd love to hear it. Everybody on the line, thank you so much. And you know what? Right now, as I said, the BBPA is really working hard to help us as a community not only survive and thrive as not only individuals, but as a community and as a business sector as well. We continue to put out diverse resources, and we will do so. 2021, although 2020 had a lot of significant challenges, we are poised to really take off in 2021 with significantly more resources. Thank you for supporting us today. Please come out again next week, as we'll be back again talking about this part 2 of mental health challenges in the community today. Thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate you. Stay safe, stay sound, and remember, protect your mental health.